Right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our live Q&A retirement show this fabulous Wednesday. Now, each week we are here to answer your retirement questions. When we last counted, I think we had just over 8,000 questions. Now, that was a while back, and I'm sure we have much higher numbers now, but I just wanted to let you know kind of the scope of all the questions that are coming in. And as you can see, we have a guest with us. So we have Dr. Mary Flett with us today, and I'm excited to have her with us live. I mean, this is so cool. So, Dr. Mary, welcome to our show today.
Thanks so much, CR. I got to tell you, I'm really excited about talking with your listeners.
Well, we are excited to have you here because there is so many fun conversations that we've had not only before, but I've listened to you on other podcasts. And I think what you bring is something that we just don't talk about enough. And I'm so excited to have you here to just dive deep into some topics today.
So, one of the things is we don't have a good language to talk about aging. Most of the conversations I have with people about medical issues, about death and dying, about insurance, not having enough money. Oh my God, that's not what aging is about at all. And I love having conversations to change how we talk about this really extraordinary and wonderful time of life. So bring on the questions and let's hear from some people if they're willing to talk.
Okay. Now, before I do that, I do want to dive into a little bit here because I was reading over your book, five keys of aging to aging better and aging well, and I was reading some things, so I hesitate about this, but I know I wanted to introduce you to our guest here, where you've had over that 20 years of your life as a licensed psychologist. You're an author, a featured speaker, a teacher, and I hesitated reading some of that because after reading the five pillars of aging. I wanted to talk more about the here and now, those new endeavors that you are enjoying today, and we're not wrapped up in, what we did or maybe rather who we are or what we're doing today and now.
Well, I'm not quite sure what that means, but I'm going to take it as an invitation to tell you what I'm about right now.
Yes.
So, this truly is one of the most remarkable times in our history. No generation ever in history has lived this long, this well. And one of the things that is a consequence of that is we're in new territory. The ways we used to think about growing old, sitting on the rocker, fading away, living in the old nursing home, that just doesn't apply anymore. And it doesn't apply for a lot of different reasons. What it does ask of us, though, is that we set aside some of these stereotypes, many of which we're not even aware that we carry. Let me give you an example. The other day, I was shopping, and one of my favorite stores. I know you like stores, so I'm going to tell you about this. It's a great store out here. It's one of those places where you walk in and the color of the vegetables just jumps out, and the people there are all excited and they're filling the shelves. It's a wonderful place to go. And I noticed there were a lot of old people there. Now, you have to understand, I don't think of myself as old. When I look in the mirror, I see somebody who's like in their late 40s, mid 50s. And truth be told, I'm almost 70. So one of the challenges here is that gap between my inner perception of myself and my external experience. So I do my shopping. I'm getting all the fun stuff that I want, eating all well things and good stuff like that. And I go to check out. And I think I was in a short line, but of course, it's never a short line, is it? It's always a long line. And I know you take that opportunity to have conversations with people. So
Yes.
I was kind of chatting up other people around me, and the checkout person, who is just delightful, starts pointing down to the counter where you put, your money or your cards and stuff like that. And she keeps doing this. I went, what? She has a tick. There's something wrong with her neck. It's a hard life. And she says, I can't tell you this, but it's senior discount day. And honest to God, CR, this is what I thought. Why would you give a discount to high school seniors?
I love that.
So here's the thing. The word senior is a word that is used pervasively in advertising throughout our culture. And if your listeners think about this, it brings to mind a very specific image. I don't fit that image. So what I tell people now is I graduated twice already. So I've had 2 senior experiences. My next graduation is not going to be like anyone before. So please don't call me senior. So then the question is, well, what should I call you? And here we run into one of these things that it's evolving. Language is evolving. Elder, and as you know, I mean, there are many different definitions of elder depending on your spiritual framework, depending on your cultural framework. And I don't want to appropriate that term, but it is a term that is understood to have a certain gravitas. You've lived a certain amount of life. You've done a certain amount of things. You've acquired experience, not necessarily wisdom, but experience. So I think elder is a useful term. Aging adult. Oh, excuse me. Let me step back. Not elderly, but elder.
Mhm.
Okay. Aging adult is another term that I use a lot. Older adult term I use a lot. In teaching this to younger people, it's funny because even in the literature and even in the research, I don't mean to bore people here, but this is important. 30, 40 years ago, when I was learning all of this stuff in grad school, we had a template for how to grow old. A person by the name of Eric Erickson came up with the stages of aging. He had 8 of them. And each of these stages had years attached to it, like 0 to 6, 6 to
Mhm.
12, all that sort of stuff. Well, we got to 60 and we ran off the cliff. It was just old. But then researchers started looking at what aging meant. So we went from old to young old, and older old. Well, isn't that helpful?
Yeah.
And now we've surpassed that. So we have young old, older old, and oldest old. We're not doing a very good job here. So we're learning, we're acquiring new language to talk about this time of life. There are certain things that come with this time of life that we have to engage with. We have to recognize that this body, this vehicle that I came in, carries with it some diseases, carries with it injuries, carries with it genetic complications. And to overcome those, I have to learn how to adapt myself to it or accommodate my environment. That's one of these 5 pillars: adaptation and accommodation. It's also an attitude. Okay. So I could go out and demand that I have my parking place and people are going to get out of my way. Or I could find some way to engage with my environment, maybe have special shelves lowered at a lower level or make bathrooms accessible. So I don't want to be wandering off too much here, but the, the, the focus of this time of age is a combination of exploring new areas with a new mindset and really taking into account the role model that I am and the legacy I'm going to leave behind for my children and grandchildren of what it means to live a quality life 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, and not have that be unusual.
And I love that so much, Dr. Mary, and I appreciate you going into a little bit more depth there. And I want to remind those that are here watching us live that if you have questions, she's here to talk to you. She's here to answer some questions, so don't be afraid. And I want to pull up my first question. That's actually, you brought this up just a bit ago, but what are those 5 pillars of aging? That's what Sheila would like to know.
So this was an idea that I came up with, and literally, for those of you who might be into this sort of thing, it came from a dream. And I call it a lease on aging. So each of these letters stands for something. First pillar of aging is creating a legacy of values. And what I mean by values is the things that really underlie our decisions. And for those listeners who are followers of Dave, a lot of folks who work with finances, we really talk about the paperwork and putting money aside. And that's a value of security. It's the need for security that's driving that effort. So creating a legacy of values. Second one is staying engaged over the lifespan. And what I mean by that is physical engagement. So getting out and walking, Emotional engagement, staying connected with people and things that give you a sense of love. And that can be anything from music to watching puppies to kitty cat videos to TikTok, whatever it is. It's just that sense of love and care. Um, Physical, psychological, emotional, and spiritual connection. That's a very important piece of this, which actually is a separate pillar. Um, there is also this need to adapt and accommodate to aging. That's the third pillar. Finding purpose and meaning. This is a particularly challenging pillar because our culture doesn't really value aging, and areas that we could contribute in. Sometimes we're dismissed or we become invisible. This is a footnote here on this finding purpose and meaning, but I oftentimes work with people who have gone to what I call golden ghettos. They move to some of the 55 and older communities, and they're surrounded by people just like them, but they're not connected to different generations. They're not connected to the energy that's going on outside. It becomes a very small circle. And that has a downside to it as well as a positive side. And the very last pillar, to answer Sheila's question, is what I call emotional economics. This is a sense of I am enough. I'm valued for who I am. I have enough. There's a sense that what I have that's sustaining me will be there. And I know what's good enough. And this good enough issue is really about quality of life. It's about saying, I don't need more of this, or I would love to have some more of this. This is a way I can give back. And this is how I can share all of myself in life. So, lease, legacy, engagement, adaptation, spiritual life, and emotional life. That's the 5 pillars.
And I wish we could unpack these. There's so much with this and so many great things that you talk about. So, for those that are interested in this and want to know more about those 5 pillars of aging, what's the best way for them to get some more information?
Well, I just invite you to go to my website, which happens to be fivepillarsofaging.com. What a catchy title. And you
Yeah.
spell all that out. So fivepillarsofaging.com.
Perfect. Well, we'll go ahead and keep moving on because I've got so many awesome questions I want to ask you as we get going here. All right. So, David's question next, and David's age 62. Not always do we get people that give us their age. A lot of times it's just in there, but it just kind of helps in context for a lot of these things. If people are saying, am I able to retire? When can I retire? So, if we look at a lot of these shows, you'll see different ages and different things pop up in here. But David is saying, how good or bad is semi retirement for you?
Well, it's a very personal question, Dave, and I'm going to answer it. It's great for me. There is a larger question here that you're asking. And I notice this, and this goes back to this languaging thing that I was talking about. Good or bad? I think there's an implicit suggestion there that somehow after we retire, which is an interesting word, that things go kind of down the tubes. And when you unpack that, I just ask you to think about who your role models were, because this is so influential. If you come from a family or you were in a community where people stopped work and then kind of got shoved to the side, and maybe they gardened and they felt good about gardening but complained about their arthritis, or maybe they played a lot of golf or went on a lot of cruises,
Mhm.
or maybe they had to continue to work. Maybe they ended up having to care for a child or a grandchild. Maybe they didn't have a choice of not doing versus doing. I like to talk about this transition period as a time of changing from being a human doing to becoming a human being. And one of the things that our culture has allowed us to do is to experience less work in the official sense of it, the traditional sense of it, and find ways of contributing, continuing to produce things, but in a different way. So when I look at it this way, the reason why my life is so good, retired, I'm still working, but I'm doing the kind of work that gives me a sense
Mm,
of accomplishment, gives me a sense of agency in the
love
world.
that.
I know I'm making a difference in people's lives. And if I don't feel like getting to my computer first thing in the morning and I want to play with my cats, I can. Nobody's telling me what I want to do. So I actually have so much more freedom and so many more choices and opportunities to make a difference. So, Dave, it wasn't a simple question.
For sure. Now, I want to ask you because in your book, I found this and I wanted to see if this will apply to what you're talking about. You said our true value lies not in what we do, but in what we bring to the doing.
I, sometimes I amaze myself at what I say. Um, I, I think who we are can, to use a gardening term, really come into full bloom once all of our obligations shift. And they do this as we age. Our obligations to children, obviously, if you have young children at home, or even if you're an empty nester, we never forget about our kids. We're never not going to worry
Mhm.
about our kids, but how we do that shifts. We see this in a lot of end of life conversations where the children are really concerned about mom or dad because they're afraid that something bad is going to happen to mom or dad. Well, that fear is actually kind of reversed because as parents, we're always afraid something bad's going to happen to our kids.
Yep.
What becomes an interesting negotiation here, and I think this is a really fertile ground for some of your listeners, is we have to address the fear there. And the fear of a child losing a parent is always going to be there.
Mhm.
I have a neighbor who was in her 80s when her mother passed at 105.
Wow.
One of the most interesting transitions, cultural transitions, is when do we become an adult?
Mhm.
And so tying that together, she was always her mother's child until she was in her
Mhm.
80s.
Wow.
When I look at these roles and what we expect and how we negotiate who cares for whom, we really have to think about this in terms of not just the physical care and the emotional care, but in opening our hearts to receiving, which in some cases may be difficult, particularly if there are dark legacies in a family, legacies of poverty or of shame or of incest or abuse or,
Mhm.
substance use. It may be very, very difficult to connect with an aging parent who now needs your support and care.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I wanted to talk about too, because you brought up something that I thought was very interesting. Is you kind of talk about this gardening as a metaphor, because Dave uses all the tools in that shed as that. And I know you don't love the word retirement, but in that kind of retirement vehicle, something to say, in order to get you to full bloom, we've got to make sure we have all the right tools. We've got to make sure we have those shovels and those rakes, and we're using the right tool to get to the right area. And
Yeah.
I love that you can kind of tie that together too, because, what is the full bloom, right? When is that? Because, like you said, it's when do we stop becoming, a kid to our parents? Because, like you said, in your 80s, she probably felt, like you said, we feel so young still. I look at my body and I feel like, oh, it hurts, or this hurts, or that hurts, but I still feel so young. I feel like I could go do these things. And my son, he's a runner, and he's like, Dad, let's go run. And I'm like, well, let's see if I can do it maybe next week when I get a little bit better. My back doesn't hurt. But in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, I could outrun you all day long.
The truth is this vehicle, this physical vehicle of ours takes a beating.
Hmm.
Back in the day, there was an ad with a guy named John Cameron Swayze on the television. If older listeners might remember him, he was a spokesperson for Timex, and he would say, "This is takes a licking and keeps on ticking." And this our bodies are these remarkable vehicles of resistance and overcoming. And in spite of everything we do to them, they find a way to support us. But there are diseases, there is illness, there are consequences to choices we make, smoking, poor eating habits, that take a toll on this vehicle. But I want to be very clear. Aging does not mean your body declines. It has
Hmm.
nothing to do with aging. And it's important to separate those two notions, because this is one of these implicit beliefs that so many of us have. As I get older, my body will hurt. Well, maybe not.
Hmm.
But how we and this is the tools in the shed thing, how we treat our body, how we maintain our body. Somebody made a comment about this, that we spend more time and effort on making sure our cars are maintained correctly, our warranty doesn't expire, than we do on our bodies.
Wow.
And if we just had the same kind of attitude about, I got to do my 10,000-mile checkup. Well, what does that mean? Am I
Mhm.
getting enough sleep? Am I drinking enough water? Am I getting proper nutrition? Am I surrounded by people who make me happy?
Mhm.
There are all these elements that oftentimes we don't take. These are variables that we don't take into consideration. I totally forget what you were asking me, but it was sure fun going down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. What you're saying is speaking to my heart. And I want to keep moving on here. And I want to remind those that are here with us live, go ahead and get your questions into Dr. Mary, because we will do our best to squeeze those in our other questions here. And we've got about 10 more minutes on our show, so I don't want to let that pass by. And again, if you have a question, you just can't get to it, you can always go to retirementriskadvisors.com/questions. And that's where you can put your questions in, because I know it gets intimidating sometimes by saying, hey, I'm here on Facebook and YouTube and I want to get that question in. But let me get this next question to you. This one's from James. How important is it to plan for unplanned events, things while readying for retirement?
So, James, you answered the question yourself. It's very important. And that's not self-serving. Uh, what I have learned in my life is, and some of your listeners may have heard of this thing called a bell-shaped curve, which looks like a bell. Okay.
Mhm.
And there are people on one end of it that are absolute planners. And these are the people that CPAs just love, because they come in and they have all their paperwork ready.
Yeah.
And then there are people like my mother, may she rest in peace, who didn't plan anything. And somehow people always surrounded her, who would take care of her and would clean up the mess. And as the daughter, that was my job. And life got handled for her. And then there are the rest of us in the middle. And the rest of us in the middle are those who are going to benefit the most from planning. What I have discovered, though, is the majority of people, not good or bad, right or wrong, just assume that it's never going to happen to them. I think a sad example of this, I say sad because there's so many consequences of this, was listening to some of the interviews with people in Florida after Hurricane Ian. And, disasters are an interesting thing. Hurricanes in particular, they're coming. You have the opportunity to leave, but people don't do that. They don't make the choice to necessarily act in their own best interests. After it was over, when the destruction was there and nothing was left, then people say, well, why aren't you taking care of me? And I think this is much more of a human state. We don't want to conceive of a horrible, terrible thing. For people who have a lot of anxiety, who are thinking about this, actually ruminating about it, it becomes a problem in and of itself, because there is nothing out there that is actually going to totally reassure us. But we get down to this. When we talk about a quality of life, when we talk about values driving our decisions. So this, we talked about at the very beginning of the podcast here. Um, Wanting to have enough money in the bank. The value underneath that is security. Okay. So what about a value at looking at it in terms of how are you going to ensure that you feel safe? Okay. Well, for some people, that'll mean I have to have a roof over my head. Okay. Well, we can work with that. For other people, it may mean I need to know that I have $500,000 in the bank. Okay. Well, we can work with that. For some people, it may mean I just need to know that my animals are close to me, or I can call my buddy or my friend. So that's where it really, I don't mean to dodge this question,
Mhm.
but it really is a very, very individual thing.
Yes.
There are so many groups and organizations out there and trained individuals that if you are reluctant to face this, what seems to be overwhelming idea, really all you have to do is reach out. And I invite you to reach out to a qualified professional. And this is going to come across as being very judgmental, but it has been my experience. Please don't go on a lot of chat lines, because you're not going to find useful information there. You will find information, but
Yeah.
not necessarily useful and reliable information.
Yeah, I love that, and I'm glad you brought up Hurricane Ian. It's a 9-hour drive from me to get down to that area, and I in fact went with a group of people just about 4 weeks ago, and we did cleanup for that. So we went down there, and our group was assigned for 3 days is to just cut down all the trees and remove all the trees from people's yards so they could actually get in and out of their driveway for those that did leave. And I'll tell you, I saw people that were one couple particularly. They 80 years young. They were out there cutting down the trees that have fallen with chainsaws by themselves for
Yeah.
days on days on days. And we showed up with a group about 20 of us, and we took care of in an hour, cleared their entire back area of all of these trees. And afterwards, the guy Vito gave me a big hug and just said, "This would have taken me weeks." And he goes, "Thank you for coming." And I like that you bring that up, not because of it's a pat on the back for me, because I just love service in general. I love because you talk about the 5 pillars of aging. I need those even in my life. It's because I still need that human connection and that human touch. And to be able to go down and see people who didn't leave and the people who did leave, I saw destruction I've never seen before. And I drove through neighborhoods and my eyes were open to things that Mother Nature, how catastrophic it is. But I like to bring that up because, again, people are still saying, "Hey, don't forget me."
Absolutely. And my husband and I were both very involved with the American Red Cross for years and did disaster response. And I came away from that similar to what you were saying, the sense of service of just being able to be helpful to people when they most needed it. And I truly believe this, and that human beings will show up for each other, in
Mhm.
spite of what some of the pundits talk about and all the rest of that. The downside to it, though, is that we're living in a world that is far more catastrophic than it has been in many generations. I live in Northern California, and I've had two close friends, lose everything in forest fires. These are cataclysmic wildfires. And one of the things earlier conversation here is, I am really rethinking about how I want to live my next 10, 20 years. I don't think I can stay in a single place because there won't be enough water. There will be a high risk for wildfire. And one of the lessons that I learned in this past few years, and particularly around COVID, is for people who are unable to move themselves, people who are in skilled nursing facilities, long term care, we haven't prepared as a culture, as a society, for what to do if those places no longer exist
Mm.
due to wildfire or catastrophe. Um, Placing frail elders who need 24-hour care someplace else when their place is just burned down is not something that is in most people's minds. So not only do individuals have to have this mindset of how do I prepare for what is coming up, but communities. And community, I use a broad definition of community here. Community is not just a geographic area, it's not just a governmental area, it's also communities of care, communities of faith, communities of just however we look at this. We're going to need to figure out how to connect and stay supportive of each other because things are changing that we have no control over.
Mhm. I totally agree. And Dr. Mary, I can't believe it's come and gone 30 minutes already. It feels like I still have a whole list of questions to still throw at you. And I'm sorry that I've talked so much and I've taken so much time, but I can't tell you thank you enough for being here and talking about all these amazing topics.
It has been my pleasure, CR. And if please invite your listeners if they would like to follow up with any questions for me, I'm sure you have the way of doing that. I'll be delighted to answer questions offline and send them a response.
And I want to ask you too, because then again, in the book I was reading, you have this thing at the end where you say there's actions to take. So after our conversation, I want to know maybe what the actionable item is you can share with us today that those who are listening or on replay can take away today.
Well, I'll tell you one of the easiest things, and this is going to be in my best interest, but starting in January, I've got an online course called No Time Like the Present. where for 6 weeks, a small group of us, 8 of us, will go through answering a lot of these questions using a workbook that I developed and come up as a group and form our own little community of support to address these ongoing issues of what it means to grow older in the 21st century and really embrace the opportunities that brings. So you can find that at fivepillars.com and you can sign up for it right now.
That is so great. And I was going to ask you how people get a hold of you. So that's a great way right there to get started and get going.
And you can also write me at drmaryflett.com.
Perfect. And I just want to put another thing out there for you because don't forget to catch Dr. Mary on the podcast. She was on the Retirement Risk Show with Dave, and she was on episode 43. It's a fantastic interview as you guys dive into the topic, not retirement, but aging adults. And that's something that was a key thing for me to learn and take away as our team went through and we work on that. Thank you so much for teaching us not only these concepts that are better for us to understand and digest, but helping us to understand this idea of aging is something that, again, for us, we looked at it as like you talked about, as maybe a throwaway, but it's something is that we're still here, we're still alive, we're still here to just live life. And I really appreciate that insight.
We can all learn how to embrace the shift that aging brings.
And I'm very honored that you took time to be with us today. And I hope that you'll come back again. And I promise I have a lot more questions for you if we can do this again.
It would be my pleasure. Thanks so much, CR.
All right. And thank you. And everyone, again, don't forget to catch us every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time. We are here. We're here answering all of your questions. It's Social Security, Medicare, long-term care, reverse mortgage. We want to make sure that as you come, you have those questions answered, or at least we can guide you to the right places. Because again, the more prepared you are, the better you're going to be. And again, thank you so much. And we'll see you guys again next week.
Happy Thanksgiving.